When I asked about my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law replied, "We got married yesterday. Only special people were invited, no one to embarrass the family." A week later, he sent me a message saying, "Send me the rent money." I answered, "Didn't I tell you?" He replied, "Tell me what, you crazy old man." I sent back a photo of the eviction notice and wrote, "I told you that I don't pay rent to myself. Before I tell you how I kicked my own ungrateful daughter and her arrogant husband out of my building, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the very people you sacrificed everything for." My name is Gerald, but everyone calls me Jerry. I am 70 years old, and I have spent 45 of those years with calluses on my hands and cement dust in my lungs. I built half the foundations in the suburbs of Seattle, working as a general contractor. I am not a man of fancy suits or expensive wines. I drive a 20-year-old Ford F-150 that sounds like a dying tractor, and I prefer a cold beer on my porch to a champagne brunch. But I am a father, and for my daughter Madison, I would have moved mountains. I thought I had given her everything. I did not know that to her and her new husband, I was nothing more than a walking checkbook that had finally run out of pages. It was a Saturday afternoon when I pulled my truck up to the valet stand of the Grand Hotel. The valet looked at my rusted bumper with a sneer, but I ignored him. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up the velvet box. Inside was a string of pearls, real saltwater pearls. They belonged to my late wife. She had worn them on our wedding day 40 years ago. We were poor back then. We ate sandwiches at our reception, but she looked like a queen in those pearls. Before she passed 5 years ago, she made me promise. She said, "Jerry, give these to Madison on her big day. Tell her they carry our love." I patted the breast pocket of my tuxedo. It was an old tux, a bit tight around the shoulders now, and it smelled faintly of mothballs despite the dry cleaning. But I did not care. Today was the rehearsal dinner. Tomorrow would be the wedding. My little girl was getting married to Preston Sterling, a man who claimed to be a tech genius, a startup founder, a visionary. I never liked Preston. He had a handshake like a wet fish, and he never looked you in the eye. But Madison loved him, or at least she loved the idea of him. I walked into the lobby. It was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, gold leaf on the ceiling. It smelled of lilies and money. I walked up to the front desk smiling. I was the father of the bride. I had a right to smile. "I am here for the Sterling and Sullivan rehearsal dinner," I told the young woman at the desk. She typed on her computer. She frowned. She typed again. "Sir," she said, looking up with a confused expression, "the Sterling wedding was yesterday." I laughed, a nervous short laugh. "No, you must be mistaken. The rehearsal is tonight. The ceremony is tomorrow Sunday. I have the invitation right here on my phone." I fumbled for my phone, my fingers suddenly feeling thick and clumsy. I showed her the digital invite Madison had sent me months ago. The receptionist looked at me with pity. That is the look I hate the most. Pity. "Sir," she said softly. "The grand ballroom was booked for the Sterling wedding yesterday. The reception ended at midnight. The couple has already checked out. They left for their honeymoon this morning." The lobby went silent. The chatter of the guests, the clinking of glasses from the bar, the music, everything faded into a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Yesterday. They got married yesterday. My hand went to my chest. I could feel the hard shape of the velvet box through the fabric of my tuxedo. The pearls. My wife's pearls. They were supposed to be her something old. I dialed Madison's number. Straight to voicemail. I dialed again. Voicemail. Then I called Preston. He answered on the second ring. "Hello? Preston, it is Jerry. I am at the hotel. The receptionist says the wedding was yesterday. What is going on?" There was a pause. I heard wind in the background. Maybe they were at the airport. Maybe they were already on a beach. Oh. Hey, Jerry. Preston's voice was casual. Too casual. Yeah. Look, plans changed. We moved the date up. You moved the date up, I repeated. And you forgot to tell the father of the bride. We didn't forget, Jerry. Preston let out a sigh, the kind you give a slow child. Look, let's be honest. Madison and I wanted a certain aesthetic, an elegant vibe. We invited investors, partners, high net worth individuals, people who matter to my future. Are you saying I don't matter? I am saying you don't fit. Preston snapped. His voice lost its fake politeness. Look at you, Jerry. You drive a truck that belongs in a junkyard. You wear clothes from Walmart. You talk loud. You tell boring stories about pouring concrete. Madison was terrified you would say something stupid or try to shake hands with the venture capitalists with your rough hands. We did it to protect the brand. The brand. My daughter's marriage was a brand. I stood there in the middle of the lobby, freezing cold. I paid for it, I whispered. My voice was shaking, but not from sadness. From a rage so hot, it felt like lava in my veins. I paid for the deposit. $150,000. Yeah, and we appreciate that, Preston said. Consider it your contribution to Madison's happiness. But money doesn't buy class, Jerry. Just go home. We will send you some photos when we get back. Oh, and don't make a scene. It would be pathetic. He hung up. I lowered the phone. I looked at the black screen. 1 week ago, I sat at my kitchen table with that check in front of me. $150,000. It was the money from the sale of the lakefront lot I had bought 30 years ago. That land was supposed to be my retirement. It was supposed to be the place where I built a small cabin to fish and grow old in peace. Madison had come to me crying. She said, Daddy, Preston's investors are watching. If we don't have a luxury wedding, they won't take him seriously. Please, Daddy. It is my dream. I looked at her. I saw the little girl who used to scrape her knees and run to me for a bandage. I saw my wife's eyes in her face. So I sold the land. I signed the check. I handed over my future so she could have her fairy tale. And this was my thank you. Standing in that lobby, I felt like a ghost. People walked past me. Men in expensive suits. Women in silk dresses. They looked through me. To them, I was just an old man in an ill-fitting tuxedo looking lost and confused. Preston was right about one thing. I did not fit in their world. I was a builder. A man of structure and steel and concrete. A man who honored contracts. A man who knew that if the foundation is rotten, the house will fall. I reached into my pocket and took out the velvet box. I opened it. The pearls shimmered under the hotel lights. They looked pure, innocent, unlike my daughter, unlike the monster she had married. I snapped the box shut. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet lobby. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not throw the vase of flowers on the counter. I walked out of the hotel. I walked past the valet who was still smirking at my truck. I climbed into the driver's seat of my Ford F-150. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter. They thought I was weak because I was old. They thought I was stupid because I worked with my hands. They thought they could take my money, my dignity, and my love and throw me away like a used napkin. I gripped the steering wheel. My knuckles turned white. My calloused hands, the hands that had built half this city, tightened until the leather creaked. They wanted me to go home. Fine. I would go home. But they forgot one thing. I didn't just pay for the wedding. I knew where they lived. I knew their secrets. And most importantly, I knew the value of $1 and the cost of betrayal. Preston wanted a brand. I was about to give him a lesson in business. I put the truck in gear and drove away from the Grand Hotel. As the city lights blurred past me, I made a vow. I would not be the sad old father. I would be the landlord. And rent was due. The drive back from the Grand Hotel was the longest 2 hours of my life. The interior of my truck usually felt like a sanctuary, a place of solitude where I could think. But tonight, the silence was suffocating. Every mile marker I passed felt like another year of my life that I had wasted investing in a future that did not include me. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the house, the headlights swept across the peeling white paint of the porch railing. I had been meaning to fix that railing for months, but I had been too busy taking extra consulting jobs to pay for the wedding that had already happened. I turned off the engine and sat there in the dark for a long time. The house looked like a sleeping beast. It was a good, sturdy house built in the late 70s. It was the house where my wife and I brought Madison home from the hospital, wrapped in a pink blanket. It was the house where I bandaged scraped knees and chased away nightmares. Now it just felt like a pile of wood and brick that held too many ghosts. I unlocked the front door, and the smell of the house hit me. It smelled of lemon polish and old paper, and the lingering scent of the lavender potpourri my wife used to make. I walked through the living room, not bothering to turn on the lights. I knew the path by heart. My feet carried me instinctively down the hallway to the last door on the left. Madison's room. I pushed the door open. It creaked slightly, a sound that used to make me freeze when I was checking on her late at night, trying not to wake her. I flipped the switch and the room flooded with light. It was exactly as she had left it when she moved in with Preston 2 years ago. It was a shrine to her childhood. The walls were painted a soft lavender, a color she had begged for when she was 12. The shelves were lined with participation trophies, debate team medals, and a dusty collection of porcelain dolls she used to love. I walked over to the dresser. There was a framed photo of us from her high school graduation. I was wearing my best suit, grinning like a fool with my arm around her shoulders. She looked happy then. Or maybe she was just good at acting even back then. I touched the glass, tracing the smile on her face. I remembered that day clearly. I had given her a check for her first car, a safe, sensible sedan. She had hugged me and told me I was the best dad in the world. When did that change? When did I go from being the hero to the embarrassment? My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. The vibration felt violent in the quiet room. I pulled it out, expecting an apology. Maybe Preston had realized he crossed a line. Maybe Madison had come to her senses. It was a notification from Instagram. Madison had tagged me in a photo. My thumb hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to throw the phone through the window and never look at it again. But the other part, the part of me that was a glutton for punishment, tapped the notification. The photo loaded. It was high-resolution professional quality. It must have been taken yesterday at the reception. The background was a blur of golden light and white roses. In the center stood Madison and Preston holding champagne flutes. They looked like models in a magazine. Preston was wearing a white tuxedo jacket that probably cost more than my truck. Madison looked stunning in a lace gown that hugged her figure. But it was the people standing next to them that made my breath catch in my throat. On Preston's side stood his parents, Robert and Cynthia Sterling. I had met them twice. They were people who smiled with their mouths, but never with their eyes. They were standing close to the couple, beaming with pride. Robert had his hand on Preston's shoulder. Cynthia was holding Madison's hand. They looked like a perfect family, a complete unit. And then I read the caption. Finally, Mrs. Sterling. The most magical day of my life, surrounded by the people who mean the most. Pure happiness. #love, #family, #new beginnings. Surrounded by the people who mean the most. I read those words again and again. The sentence burned itself into my retinas. I was not there. The man who worked double shifts to pay for her braces was not there. The man who sat by her bedside when she had pneumonia was not there. The man who just signed away his retirement fund for this party was not there. And according to her caption, I was not one of the people who meant the most. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp constriction that made it hard to breathe. I sat down on the edge of her bed, the mattress dipping under my weight. I felt heavy, old, useless. Then the phone rang. The screen lit up with a photo of her face. The word princess flashed on the screen. That was how I had her saved in my contacts. Princess. I almost laughed, but it would have sounded like a sob. I stared at the ringing phone. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. I slid my thumb across the screen and brought the phone to my ear. I did not say anything. I just listened. Daddy. Her voice was breathless, sweet, chirpy. It was the voice she used when she wanted something. The voice she used when she was 5 and wanted ice cream before dinner. I did not answer. Daddy, are you there? Look, I know you are probably confused. I found my voice. It sounded like gravel rubbing together. Confused is not the word, Madison. Oh, Daddy, please don't use that tone. She let out a little sigh. We just got into the hotel room in the Maldives. It is so beautiful here. The water is so blue. I wish you could see it. I saw the photo, Madison. There was a pause, a hesitation. Oh, you saw that. Well, that is actually why I am calling. Preston told me you went to the hotel today. He said you seemed really upset. I went to the rehearsal dinner, Madison. The one you invited me to. I know. She spoke faster now, rushing the words. Daddy, listen. We wanted you there. We really did. But Preston spoke to a doctor friend of his. He told him about your dizzy spells last year. You know, when you got dehydrated on the job site. That was heat exhaustion, Madison. It was 90 degrees and I was roofing a house. Right, well, Preston was really worried. He said that a wedding is a high-stress event, high emotions, loud music. He was terrified that with your high blood pressure, you might have a stroke or something if you got too excited. We did it for you, Daddy. We wanted to protect your health. That is why we kept it small. Just close friends and the Sterlings, because you know they are financing Preston's company, so they had to be there for business reasons. I closed my eyes. I could hear the ocean in the background of her call. Or maybe it was just white noise. High blood pressure. I have had the blood pressure of a 20-year-old athlete my entire life. I climb ladders and haul lumber every day. This was not a reason. This was a lie. A lazy, insulting lie. She was gaslighting me. She was taking my reality and twisting it until I was supposed to thank her for excluding me. So you protected me, I said slowly, keeping my voice flat, by not inviting me to my only daughter's wedding. Exactly. I knew you would understand. You are always so practical. Practical. Yes, that is what I was. Practical Jerry. Reliable Jerry. Anyway, Daddy, I have to go. Preston is waiting for me for dinner. We are going to this underwater restaurant. It is insane. Oh, and Daddy. Yes, about that check. The deposit for the venue. Since we moved the date up, the venue charged a rush fee and a cancellation fee for the Sunday slot. So the full amount you sent is pretty much gone. But don't worry, we had the most amazing time. It was worth every penny. Love you, Daddy. The line went dead. I lowered the phone and looked at my reflection in the mirror on her closet door. I saw a gray-haired man in a wrinkled t-shirt sitting in a pink room surrounded by the ghosts of a happy childhood that probably never existed the way I remembered it. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. On the counter sat my checkbook. The carbon copy of check number 4052 was staring at me. $150,000. Payable to the Grand Hotel Event Services. My hand reached for the phone again. I could call the bank. It was Saturday night. I could leave a message on the fraud line. I could stop payment first thing Monday morning. I could tell them I made a mistake. I could tell them the contract was void. I could save my retirement. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone hummed in my ear, but then I stopped. If I cancel the check now, they will know I am angry. They will know I am cutting them off. They will spin it. They will tell everyone I am a vindictive old man who ruined their honeymoon. They will play the victim, and I will never see the inside of their lives again. I will never know the truth of what they are really doing. No. I slowly placed the receiver back on the cradle. Preston thinks I am stupid. Madison thinks I am a pushover. They think I am just a wallet with a heartbeat. I decided right then and there to let them keep thinking that. I would let the check clear. I would let them have their money. I would let them think they had won. Because when you are trapping a rat, you don't snap the trap the moment it sniffs the cheese. You wait until it takes the whole bite. I walked over to the fridge and pulled out a cold beer. I cracked it open and took a long sip. The bitterness tasted good. It washed away the sweet taste of her lies. I looked around the empty kitchen. "Enjoy the Maldives, Madison," I said to the empty room, "because when you get back, the locks on your life are going to be changed." I took another sip, and for the first time that night, I felt calm. It was the calm of a man who has just started a demolition job. The dynamite was set. Now I just had to wait for the fuse to burn. 3 days had passed since the incident at the hotel. I had not heard a word from my daughter or her husband since that brief, condescending phone call. I decided that the best way to handle the silence was to work. Idleness is the devil's workshop, they say. But for men like me, idleness is just a reminder of what we have lost. I was out in the backyard wrestling with a cedar fence post that had started to rot at the base. It was a Saturday morning, and the air was crisp. I was wearing my old work boots, the ones with the steel toes exposed, and a flannel shirt that had seen better days. Sweat dripped down my forehead, stinging my eyes. My muscles ached in that familiar, satisfying way. This was my world. Wood, earth, sweat. Problems that you could fix with a hammer and nails. Problems that did not talk back or lie to you. I had just managed to pry the old wood loose when my phone rang. It was sitting on the porch railing, buzzing angrily against the wood. I wiped my hands on my jeans, leaving streaks of dirt and grease on the denim. I walked over and looked at the screen. It was Preston. I took a deep breath. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what the next act in this circus was going to be. I answered without saying hello. I just held the phone to my ear and waited. "Jerry, is that you?" Preston's voice sounded tight, strained. There was none of the smooth arrogance from 3 days ago. "I am here, Preston." "Good. Look, we have a situation." A small hiccup. I looked out at my backyard at the half-repaired fence. A hiccup. That is what people like Preston called disasters. What kind of hiccup? We are in the Maldives, right? It is paradise, Jerry, truly. But there seems to be a glitch with the banking system here. Or maybe it is my bank back home. They froze my accounts. Some sort of security fraud alert because I am making large transactions overseas. I have been on the phone with them for hours, but the time zone difference is a nightmare. Get to the point, Preston. Right. Well, the resort is asking for an additional deposit for the underwater villa and the excursions and the private chef Madison wanted. My cards are declining. It is humiliating, Jerry. I need you to wire some funds, just to tide us over until my bank sorts this out on Monday. I leaned against the porch railing. A blue jay landed on the fence I was fixing and looked at me. How much? 50,000. I almost dropped the phone. I actually laughed, a dry, sharp bark of a laugh that startled the blue jay. $50,000. You want me to wire you $50,000 because your credit card has a glitch? It is not just the deposit, Preston said quickly, his voice rising an octave. It covers the whole package. The seaplane transfer, the champagne, everything. I will pay you back the second we land in Seattle. You know I am good for it. My company just closed a seed round. I am liquid, Jerry, but my assets are just tied up right now. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was not on my porch. I was 25 years old again. I was standing in a camping supply store with my wife holding a tent that cost $40. We were going on our honeymoon. We drove my beat-up Chevy to the Cascade Mountains. We spent a week sleeping on the hard ground. We cooked spam and beans over a fire. We bathed in the freezing cold river, screaming and laughing as the water hit our skin. The whole trip cost me $200. It was all I had. And it was the happiest week of my life. We did not need private chefs. We did not need underwater villas. We had each other, and we had the stars. And now here was this man, this stranger, asking me for $50,000 so he could pretend to be a king while I was down here fixing a rotting fence. $50,000. That was more than I made in my first 3 years of construction. That was the price of a small house in some parts of the country. Preston, I said, my voice low and steady. I don't have $50,000 lying around to send you for a vacation. There was silence on the other end. Then the tone shifted. The panic disappeared, replaced by a cold, sneering anger. Don't lie to me, Jerry. Madison told me about the land you sold. She told me you got a check for $150,000. We know you haven't spent it all on the wedding deposit yet. You are sitting on cash. That money is my retirement, Preston. That is my life's work. It is not an emergency fund for your luxury fantasies. Oh, come on, old man. Preston spat the words out. What do you need retirement money for? You live like a pauper. You fix your own fences. You drive a truck that belongs in a museum. You sit in that depressing house all day. What are you saving it for? A golden coffin. I gripped the phone tighter. The wood of the railing dug into my hip. I am saving it for my future. A future that doesn't involve bailing you out. You are so selfish. You know that. Madison is crying right now. She is in the bathroom crying because she is embarrassed that her card was declined at the spa. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want your daughter's honeymoon ruined because you are too cheap to help? I did not ruin it, Preston. You did. You booked a trip you couldn't afford to impress people who don't care about you. I can afford it, Preston shouted. I told you it is a banking error. God talking to you is like talking to a brick wall. You just don't get how finance works, do you? You think money is just cash in a mattress. You are pathetic. Then ask your parents, I said. Ask the Sterlings. They were in the photo, right? They are the people who mean the most. Ask them. They are leveraged right now. Preston stammered. They have their own investments. Look, stop being difficult. Send the money. Or else what? Or else you can forget about coming over for Christmas. Or Thanksgiving. And you know Madison and I are planning to start a family soon. My heart stopped. The air in the yard suddenly felt very cold. What did you say? You heard me. We are going to have kids, your grandchildren. If you want to be a part of their lives, if you want to hold them or see them grow up, you better start acting like a supportive father and not a stingy miser. You help us now or you don't see them. Ever. I will make sure of it. I stood there frozen. The threat hung in the air, heavy and toxic. He was using children that did not even exist yet as hostages. He was weaponizing my own bloodline against me. This was not just a spoiled brat asking for money. This was extortion. This was cruelty. I realized then that I was not dealing with a misunderstanding. I was not dealing with a clash of lifestyles. I was dealing with an enemy. A man who would strip me of everything, my money, my pride, and my family without blinking an eye. "You are threatening me, Preston," I said quietly. "I am negotiating Jerry. That is what businessmen do. We leverage assets. And right now, access to this family is an asset you have to pay for. So what is it going to be? Are you going to die alone on your pile of money? Or are you going to be a grandfather?" I looked down at my hands. They were dirty, scarred, strong. These hands had built foundations for hundreds of families. I knew the difference between a load-bearing wall and a facade, and Preston was nothing but a cheap facade. I took a deep breath. "I will think about it." I lied. "Good." Preston's voice turned smug instantly. "Don't take too long. The bank closes in an hour." The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. My hand was shaking not from fear, but from a cold, hard realization. He thought he had won. He thought he had found my weak spot. And he had. I wanted grandchildren more than anything in the world, but I would not pay a ransom to a terrorist to see them. I looked at the rotting fence post again. I picked up my hammer. I swung it with all my strength, smashing it into the decaying wood. Splinters flew everywhere. He wanted a war. He wanted to talk about assets and leverage. Fine. I pulled the broken wood out of the ground and threw it onto the pile. I wiped the sweat from my brow. I wasn't just going to fix the fence anymore. I was going to build a wall. And Preston was going to be on the other side of it. I walked back into the house, leaving the tools where they lay. I had a phone call to make. Not to the bank to wire money, but to an old friend in the city. A man who knew how to find out who really owned a penthouse apartment. The investigation was about to begin. Monday morning arrived with a gray sky that matched my mood. I drank my coffee black, standing at the kitchen window, watching the rain streak against the glass. The conversation with Preston had replayed in my head all weekend. He thought he had me cornered. He thought he could squeeze me for cash by dangling my future grandchildren in front of me like a carrot on a stick. But he made one mistake. He assumed I would sit at home and steward my anger. He didn't know that I was a man who liked to inspect the job site before I poured the concrete. I put on my heavy canvas jacket and grabbed my keys. I was going to the city. The drive to downtown Seattle took an hour. The traffic was thick, but I didn't mind. It gave me time to think. I drove my old truck past the gleaming glass skyscrapers that housed tech giants and law firms. I knew the skeletons of these buildings. I knew which ones had solid foundations and which ones were built on cut corners. I had a feeling Preston's life was about to be revealed as one of the latter. I pulled up to the Millennium Tower. It was a monstrosity of steel and glass rising 60 stories into the mist. This was where Preston claimed he had bought the penthouse. He had bragged about it at Christmas, saying it was an all-cash deal. A symbol of his company's explosive growth, he had said. I parked my truck around the back near the service entrance. I knew better than to try the front valet. Besides, I wasn't here to see the concierge. I was here to see Frank. Frank was the head of security for the building. We went back 30 years. We had worked together on the construction of the Westin back in the 90s. Frank was a good man, honest as the day is long. He had retired from construction after a back injury and took this desk job to pay the bills. I walked into the security office. Frank was there watching a wall of monitors. He looked up and his face broke into a wide grin. "Jerry, you old son of a gun," he boomed, standing up to shake my hand. His grip was still strong despite the arthritis. "What brings you to the ivory tower?" I forced a smile. "Just checking on some family business, Frank. You know my daughter Madison lives here now, up in the penthouse." Frank's smile faltered slightly. He sat back down and rubbed his chin. "Yeah. Mrs. Sterling. I see her coming and going. She looks tired, Jerry. I tried to say hello to her the other day, but her husband, that guy Preston, He kind of hurried her along, didn't even look at me. "That sounds like Preston," I said, leaning against the desk. "Listen, Frank, I need to ask you something. Off the record, between old friends." Frank looked at me steadily. "Shoot." "Preston tells me he bought that penthouse. Paid cash. But something doesn't sit right with me. You know I have a nose for BS. Does he own it, Frank?" Frank let out a low whistle. He looked around to make sure no one was listening, then lowered his voice. "Own it? Jerry, that kid couldn't own a bicycle in this zip code. He is renting. And between you and me, he is not even a good tenant." "What do you mean?" "I mean the management office is losing patience." Frank tapped a folder on his desk. "I hear things, Jerry. People talk. He is behind on rent. 2 months. They sent him a warning letter last week. If he doesn't pay up by the end of this month, they are going to start eviction proceedings. The owner of the unit is a guy from Vancouver who is looking to sell anyway. He is not happy." I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Renting. 2 months behind. And yet he was in the Maldives demanding $50,000 for champagne. "Thanks, Frank," I said quietly. "That is what I thought." Frank looked concerned. "Is everything okay, Jerry?" "It will be," I said. "It will be." "Listen. Madison gave me a spare key a while back. Asked me to water the plants if they were ever away. Since they are on their honeymoon, I thought I would go up and check on things. Make sure the pipes didn't burst or anything." Frank hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Go ahead, Jerry. I will buzz you through the elevator. Just take it easy, okay? You look like you are ready to punch a wall." "I am not going to punch a wall, Frank. I am just inspecting the structure." I took the elevator up to the 40th floor. My ears popped as it rose. The doors slid open onto a private foyer. I stepped out onto plush carpet that felt too soft under my work boots. I stood in front of the double doors of Penthouse 402. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. Madison had given it to me secretly a year ago right after they moved in. She said, "Daddy, just in case." She didn't say in case of what. Maybe deep down she knew she might need a lifeline. I inserted the key. It turned smoothly. I pushed the door open. The smell hit me first. It wasn't the smell of a home. It was the smell of a frat house disguised as a palace. Stale cigarette smoke, which was definitely against the building rules. Spilled alcohol. And something rotting. I walked in. The living room was massive with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Puget Sound. But the view was the only nice thing about it. The place was a disaster zone. Clothes were strewn everywhere. Expensive designer jackets thrown on the floor. Takeout boxes from high-end restaurants piled on the coffee table, some with half-eaten food, turning green with mold. This must be the rotting smell. I walked through the mess, stepping over a pair of Prada shoes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I went to the kitchen. It was a chef's kitchen with marble countertops and a fridge that looked like a spaceship. I opened the fridge door. It was empty. Not just low on groceries. Empty. There was a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne, a jar of olives, and a bottle of ketchup. That was it. No milk, no eggs, no vegetables. This was how they lived. On the surface, they were drinking champagne in a penthouse, but inside they were starving. It was all a performance, a hollow shell. I closed the fridge. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. Madison had grown up in a house that was always full of food. My wife made sure of it. We weren't rich, but we never went hungry. We had stew on the stove and bread in the oven. This was poverty wrapped in silk. I walked back into the living room. I needed to know how deep the rot went. I started looking around. Not snooping, really. just observing. On the dining table, there was a stack of unopened mail. I flipped through it. Final notice. Past due. Urgent. Credit card bills. Car lease payments. It was a graveyard of financial responsibility. Then I saw something poking out from under the leather sofa cushion. It looked like a ledger of some sort. I walked over and lifted the cushion. It wasn't a ledger. It was a thick envelope. I opened it. Inside were slips of paper. Receipts. But not for business expenses. The Horseshoe Casino. The Emerald Queen. Las Vegas, Macau. Tens of thousands of dollars. Withdrawals. Losses. And then I found the handwritten note at the bottom of the stack. It was scrawled on a napkin, but the message was clear. Sterling, you are down 80 grand. The boss wants his money by the 1st. Don't make us come visit your pretty wife. I dropped the napkin. My hands were shaking. This wasn't just about a failed startup. This wasn't just about bad business decisions. Preston was a gambler, a degenerate gambler. He had burned through their money. He had burned through my deposit. And now he was trying to burn through me to pay off loan sharks. He wasn't protecting Madison from stress by keeping me away from the wedding. He was isolating her. He didn't want me to see the cracks. He didn't want me to ask questions. He wanted her all to himself so he could use her credit, her name, and her father's money to dig himself out of a hole that was getting deeper every day. And Madison, my poor, foolish Madison. She probably didn't even know the extent of it. Or maybe she did and she was too terrified to leave. That explained the desperation in her voice. That explained why she went along with his lies. I looked around the apartment again. Suddenly, the luxury didn't look impressive. It looked like a cage. A gilded cage built on a foundation of lies and threats. I took out my phone. I didn't call Preston. I didn't call Madison. I started taking pictures. I photographed the empty fridge. I photographed the pile of debt notices. I photographed the gambling receipts. I photographed the threatening note on the napkin. I was gathering evidence. Not for a court of law, but for the court of reality. I needed to show Madison exactly who she had married. But first I had to secure the perimeter. Preston had mentioned that the owner was looking to sell. Frank had said the owner was unhappy. An idea began to form in my mind. It was a crazy idea, a risky idea. But it was the only way to save my daughter. I couldn't just give them money. Preston would gamble it away in a heartbeat. I couldn't just yell at them. They would cut me off. I needed control. I needed leverage. I put the papers back exactly where I found them. I smoothed out the sofa cushion. I made sure I left no trace of my presence. I walked out of the apartment and locked the door behind me. As I rode the elevator down, I wasn't feeling sad anymore. The sadness had hardened into resolve. I walked into the security office. Frank looked up from his monitor. "Everything okay up there, Jerry? You look like you saw a ghost." "I saw something, Frank," I said, my voice steady. "Listen, do you have the contact information for the property management company? Or better yet, the owner's agent?" Frank raised an eyebrow. "Why? You looking to rent a place?" "No, Frank." I pulled my checkbook out of my pocket. "I am not looking to rent. I am looking to buy." Frank's jaw dropped. "You want to buy the penthouse with the tenant inside?" "Especially with the tenant inside," I said. Frank looked at me for a long moment. Then he slowly reached for a Rolodex on his desk. "Jerry," he said quietly, "you are up to something." "I am just investing in real estate, Frank. Like Preston said, it is all about assets." I took the number he gave me. I walked out to my truck. The rain had stopped. The sun was trying to peek through the clouds. I sat in the driver's seat and looked up at the top of the tower. Somewhere up there was my daughter's life falling apart. "Hold on, princess," I whispered. "Daddy is coming. And I am bringing the wrecking ball." I sat in the cab of my truck, parked 2 blocks away from the Millennium Tower. The rain had started again, a slow, steady drizzle that blurred the world outside my windshield. But inside the cab, everything was coming into sharp, terrifying focus. I held my phone in my hand, scrolling through the dozens of high-resolution photos I had taken inside Penthouse 402. In the apartment, I had been moving fast, fueled by adrenaline and the fear of getting caught. Now, in the silence of my truck, I could actually read what I had captured. I zoomed in on a document that had been sitting right on top of Preston's desk. It was printed on thick, glossy paper with a gold logo that looked like a jagged lightning bolt. Sterling Horizons. The Future of Wealth. I read the text. It was a word salad of buzzwords that meant absolutely nothing. Decentralized ledger technology, hyper-growth yield farming, paradigm-shifting asset allocation. I have been a businessman for 40 years. I write contracts. I deal with permits. I know that if you cannot explain what you are selling in one sentence, you are either incompetent or you are a thief. I swiped to the next photo. It was a chart showing projected returns, 200% annually, guaranteed. I let out a low, humorless laugh. In the construction business, there are no guarantees. You guarantee the work will be done to code. You guarantee the materials are grade A. But you never guarantee profit because the world is unpredictable. Lumber prices go up. Labor shortages happen. It rains for 3 weeks straight. Real business is a fight against chaos. But Preston was selling magic. He was selling a fantasy where you put $1 in a box and $3 come out the next day without anyone lifting a finger. It was a classic Ponzi scheme wrapped in the shiny packaging of cryptocurrency. He was taking money from new investors, probably the friends he was bragging to at the wedding, and using it to pay off the old ones while skimming the cream for his penthouses and trips to the Maldives. I looked at my hands resting on the steering wheel. They were rough hands. The skin was leathery and permanently stained with the dust of job sites. I remembered pouring the foundation for the hospital wing in downtown Seattle. It took us 3 months just to dig the hole. We had to reinforce the earth with steel rebar thick as my arm. We had to wait for the concrete to cure properly. You could not rush it. If you cheated on this concrete, if you added too much water to make it pour faster, the foundation would crack 5 years later, and the whole building would come down. Preston was building a skyscraper out of wet cardboard, and he was standing on the roof screaming that he was a king. I swiped to the next image, and that is when the cold feeling in my stomach turned into nausea. It was a loan application, a big one. $200,000 from a private lender. The kind of lender that does not ask for a credit check, but breaks your legs if you miss a payment. The applicant's name was not Preston Sterling. It was Madison Sullivan Sterling. And there at the bottom of the page was her signature. It was the same loopy artistic signature she had practiced in her notebooks when she was a teenager. The signature of a girl who thought life was a romance novel. I zoomed in until the pixels blurred. She was listed as the chief financial officer of Sterling Horizons. My blood ran cold. Preston wasn't just a con artist. He was a coward, a parasite. He knew the house of cards was going to fall. He knew the FBI or the SEC or the angry mob of investors would eventually come knocking. And when they did, he made sure his name wasn't on the line. He had set her up. My daughter. My foolish, naive daughter. She thought she was signing papers to help her genius husband change the world. She thought she was a partner. But she was a shield. She was the one who would go to prison for fraud. She was the one who would be on the hook for millions of dollars in debt when the bubble burst. I remembered her voice on the phone. "Daddy, we did it for you. We wanted to protect your health. Protect me." She was the one walking on a minefield, and she didn't even know she was wearing the boots. I looked out the window. A man in a suit was walking his dog, trying to keep his umbrella from blowing inside out in the wind. He looked miserable. I suddenly felt a wave of pity so strong it almost choked me. I had been angry at Madison for being ungrateful. I had been hurt that she was ashamed of me. But now I saw the truth. She was a victim. She was being groomed and exploited by a sociopath who treated people like disposable assets. But then the pity turned into something hotter, something harder. Anger. Not the explosive shouting anger of a young man. This was the quiet, dangerous anger of an old man who realizes someone has touched what is his. Preston Sterling had taken my money. Fine. I can make more money. He had insulted my dignity. Fine. I have thick skin. But he had wrapped his snake like coils around my daughter's neck, and he was tightening the squeeze every day. I saved the photos to a secure folder on my phone. I emailed them to myself. I backed them up to the cloud. These were not just pictures anymore. They were ammunition. I started the engine of my truck. The diesel engine rumbled beneath me, a sound of raw power and reliability. I was not just going to evict them. That was too easy. If I just kicked them out, Preston would spin a story. He would tell Madison that her evil father ruined his business. He would take her and run to another city and start the scam all over again, using her name until she was destroyed. Number 1. I had to dismantle him, piece by piece. I had to show Madison exactly what he was. I had to make the building collapse while she was watching, so she could see there was no foundation. I put the truck in gear. "I am coming for you, Preston," I said to the empty cab, "and I am bringing the building inspector." I drove out of the alley and merged into the traffic. I had seen the blueprints of his destruction. Now it was time to start the demolition. The drive back from the city felt different than the drive in. On the way there, I was a father worried about his daughter. But on the way back, I was a man who had seen the enemy, and the enemy was wearing my family name. I pulled into my driveway as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the lawn. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of wet asphalt and pine needles. My house sat there, stoic and silent. It was a modest ranch-style home with white siding that I washed every spring and a roof I had reshingled myself 3 years ago. It was not a penthouse. It did not have marble floors or a concierge, but it was paid for. Every nail, every beam, every square inch belonged to me, or at least I thought it did. I walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. It was a habit, a ritual. I usually expected nothing more than flyers for grocery store discounts, or maybe a bill for the water. But today, there was a thick envelope sticking out. It was from a bank I did not bank with. Pacific Western Lenders, a predatory institution known for high interest rates and aggressive tactics. I pulled it out. The name on the window of the envelope made my heart skip a beat. It was addressed to Madison Sullivan Sterling. But the address was mine. I stood there by the road cars passing by in a blur of motion and sound. Why was my daughter getting mail at my house from a lender? She hadn't lived here in 2 years. I tore the envelope open. My fingers were rough and calloused, but they trembled slightly as I pulled out the documents. It was a confirmation of a home equity line of credit, a second mortgage. I scanned the page, my eyes darting over the legal jargon, until they landed on the property description. 1402 Oak Creek Lane. My house. My knees felt weak. I had to reach out and grab the wooden post of the mailbox to steady myself. A second mortgage for $250,000. Approved. Funds disbursed. How? How was this possible? The deed was in my name. My wife's name was on it too, but she was gone. Madison had no claim to this title. Not yet. Not while I was still breathing. I flipped to the next page, and there it was. The smoking gun. A power of attorney document. It stated that Gerald Sullivan, being of unsound mind or physical incapacity, hereby granted full financial authority to his son-in-law Preston Sterling to manage his assets, including real estate. And at the bottom was a signature. Gerald Sullivan. It was a good forgery. I had to give him that. He must have practiced it. He had taken the signature from the wedding check I gave him, the one for $150,000, and he had copied it. He had declared me mentally incompetent. That explained the gaslighting. That explained why he told everyone I had high blood pressure and dizzy spells. That explained why he didn't want me at the wedding. He was building a narrative. He was planting the seeds that I was a senile old man who couldn't manage his own affairs, so that when he stole my house, nobody would question it. I looked up at the house. The setting sun hit the front window, the bay window where my wife used to sit and read on Sunday mornings. I remembered the day we paid off the mortgage. We had bought a cheap bottle of champagne and danced in the living room. She told me that this house was our legacy. It was the one thing we could leave behind that proved we had been here, that we had worked hard, that we had built something real. And Preston had stolen it. He hadn't just taken my money. He hadn't just taken my daughter. He had reached into the sanctity of my home, the museum of my memories, and he had pawned it like a cheap watch to pay for his gambling debts and his fake life. If I didn't act fast, if he defaulted on this loan, which I knew he would, the bank would come. They would put a foreclosure sign on my lawn. They would kick me out of the house I built with my own hands. They would throw my wife's belongings onto the curb. I felt a roar building inside me. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical pressure in my chest. It was the feeling of a dam breaking. I crushed the papers in my hand. He wanted to play games with the law. He wanted to use paper and ink to destroy me. Well, I knew a thing or two about contracts. And I knew people who could read the fine print better than a 2-bit con artist. I marched up the driveway. I didn't go inside. I didn't want to look at the walls he had defiled with his greed. I sat on the tailgate of my truck and pulled out my phone. I scrolled past Madison's name. I scrolled past the relatives who hadn't called in years. I stopped at a name I hadn't called in a long time but kept for emergencies. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was the daughter of my old foreman. I had known her since she was a girl in pigtails running around the lumber yard. Now she was one of the sharpest real estate attorneys in Seattle. A shark in a skirt who ate fraudsters for breakfast. I pressed call. It rang once. Jerry. Sarah's voice was warm but professional. I haven't heard from you since the funeral. Is everything all right? I took a deep breath. The evening air filled my lungs, cooling the fire inside just enough so I could speak. No, Sarah. Everything is not all right. What happened? Are you in trouble? I am not in trouble, I said, my voice sounding like grinding stones. But someone is about to be. I need you to open a file, Sarah. A big one. Okay, Jerry. Talk to me. What is going on? My son-in-law. He forged my signature. He took out a second mortgage on my house. He used a fake power of attorney claiming I am incompetent. There was a silence on the other end. A sharp intake of breath. That is a felony, Jerry. That is fraud. We can go to the police right now. We can have him arrested tonight. No. I looked at the crumpled papers in my hand. Arresting him was too easy. If he went to jail now, he would just be a victim of circumstances. He would claim he was trying to save the family business. Madison would visit him in prison. She would think he was a martyr. I want to do this my way, I said. What do you want to do, Jerry? I want you to contact the lender, Pacific Western. I want you to find out exactly how much debt he's in. Not just this loan, all of it. The penthouse, the car leases, the credit cards. I want to know who holds the paper on his life. Jerry, that is going to be expensive and complicated. Why do you want to do that? Because I don't just want to send him to jail, Sarah. I want to own him. I looked at my house again. It stood strong against the darkening sky. It had weathered storms. It had weathered earthquakes. It would weather Preston Sterling. I have some money in the LLC account, the money from the land sale. It is still sitting there, Jerry Sarah warned. That is your retirement. Not anymore, I said. Now it is war funds. Listen to me, Sarah. I want you to buy the debt. I want you to approach the owner of the penthouse he is renting. I heard he wants to sell. Make him an offer he can't refuse for the unit. Cash. Close in 24 hours. You want to buy his apartment. I want to be his landlord, Sarah. I want to be his bank. I want to be the one holding the gavel when the judgment comes down. Can you do it? There was a pause. I could hear the sound of her typing furiously on a keyboard. If you have the cash, Jerry, we can move fast. The market is soft. If you come in with a full cash offer on the penthouse, we can bypass the usual inspections. As for the mortgage fraud, we can use that as leverage to freeze his assets without him knowing yet. We can let him dig the hole a little deeper before we bury him. Good. Do it. One more thing, Jerry. Sarah's voice was softer now. This is Madison we are talking about. If we pull this trigger, she is going to get caught in the blast. I closed my eyes. I saw my daughter's face. I saw her signature on the loan documents. I saw her in the photo with the Sterling smiling as if I didn't exist. She is already in the blast zone, Sarah. She just doesn't know it yet. I am not doing this to hurt her. I am doing this to wake her up. Sometimes you have to knock the house down to save the people inside from the termites. I understand. I will get the paperwork started tonight. Meet me at my office at 8 a.m. Bring the forgery. I will be there. I hung up the phone. I sat there on the tailgate for a long time watching the stars come out. They were the same stars I had watched with my wife 40 years ago. Preston thought he had stolen my past. He thought he had mortgaged my future. But he forgot one thing. I was the one who built the foundation, and I knew exactly where the weak spots were. I stood up and walked toward my house. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I had a lot of work to do. I had to find every scrap of paper, every receipt, every email. The old Jerry, the nice Jerry, the father who wrote checks and stayed quiet, was dead. He died the moment he opened that mailbox. Tomorrow a new man would walk into Sarah's office, a man with a checkbook in one hand and a sledgehammer in the other. The landlord was coming. The next morning I walked into Sarah's office wearing my best suit. It was a charcoal gray wool suit that I had bought 10 years ago for a funeral, but today it felt like armor. Sarah was already there, sitting behind her mahogany desk, surrounded by stacks of files. She looked tired, but her eyes were sharp. Beside her sat a man I did not know. He was sweating slightly, even though the air conditioning was on full blast. "This is Mr. Henderson," Sarah said, gesturing to the man. "He is the owner of Unit 402 at the Millennium Tower. Or I should say the current owner." I shook his hand. It was damp. Henderson looked like a man who was drowning, and I was the life raft. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice shaking a little, "I understand you are interested in a quick close. Cash, no contingencies." "That is right," I said, sitting down. "I am a man of my word, Mr. Henderson. If the price is right and the paperwork is clean, I can wire the funds today." Henderson let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. "Look, I will be honest with you. That unit has been a nightmare. The market has cooled down, and finding a buyer for a luxury penthouse with a non-paying tenant inside is near impossible. I have been trying to evict Mr. Sterling for 2 months, but he knows how to play the system. He claims hardship. He claims medical issues. It is just one excuse after another. I just want out." I nodded slowly. I knew exactly how Preston played the system. He was a professional victim. I am prepared to take that problem off your hands, I said. But because of the tenant situation and the risk involved, I am offering 10% below your asking price. Take it or leave it. Henderson didn't even blink. Done. I just want to stop the bleeding. The mortgage payments on that place are killing me, and I haven't seen a dime of rent since April. Sarah slid a thick document across the table. It was the purchase agreement. Now, Mr. Henderson. Sarah said, her voice professional and cold. The buyer will not be Mr. Sullivan directly. He is purchasing the property through a limited liability company, GS Holdings. We value our client's privacy. I don't care who buys it, Henderson said, pulling a pen from his pocket. As long as the check clears, you can call it Mickey Mouse Holdings for all I care. Just get that squatter out of there. I watched him sign. It was a strange feeling. For 40 years, I had been the one on the other side of these deals. I was the one building the houses, fixing the roofs, hoping the client would pay on time. I was the labor. Now I was the capital. When it was my turn to sign, my hand hovered over the paper for a split second. This was it. The money from the lakefront land. The money from my IRA. The money I had saved dollar by dollar, laying bricks in the rain. I was pushing all of it into the center of the table. If this went wrong, if Preston found a legal loophole, if the market crashed, I would be destitute. I would be a 70-year-old man greeting people at Walmart. But then I thought of Madison. I thought of her signature on that fraudulent loan. I thought of the way Preston had looked at me with such disdain. This wasn't an investment. It was a rescue mission. And rescue missions are always expensive. I signed the paper. Gerald Sullivan, managing member, GS Holdings. Sarah took the documents and notarized them with a heavy thud of her stamp. That sound echoed in the room like a judge's gavel. It is done, Sarah said. We will wire the funds immediately. The deed will be recorded by this afternoon. Henderson stood up, shaking my hand vigorously this time. Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. You have no idea what a relief this is. Good luck with him. He is a slippery one. I watched him leave the office. He looked 10 pounds lighter. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I could see the Millennium Tower from here. It looked different now. It didn't look like a fortress of exclusion anymore. It looked like something I owned. Do you realize what you just did? Sarah asked, coming to stand beside me. You just bought a $3 million crime scene. I didn't buy a crime scene, Sarah. I bought a classroom, and class is about to start. Sarah handed me a set of keys. They were heavy brass keys, not the plastic key cards they used for the main entrances. These were the master keys for the unit. So what is the plan? She asked. Do we serve the eviction notice today? No, I said, pocketing the keys. Not today. Today is Tuesday. They come back from the Maldives on Thursday. Let them land. Let them come home thinking they got away with it. Let Preston think he successfully bullied me into silence. I want him to feel safe. And then I want you to draft a letter from GS Holdings, informing the tenant that ownership has changed and that all past due rent is payable immediately to the new management. Don't mention my name, just the company. He will ignore it, Sarah said. He ignores everything. I know, I said. That is what I am counting on. I left Sarah's office and walked out onto the street. The sun was shining. For the first time in weeks, the knot of anxiety in my chest was gone. It was replaced by a cold, hard weight of authority. I walked to my truck, but I didn't get in immediately. I stood there looking at my reflection in the window. I didn't look like a retired contractor anymore. I didn't look like a lonely widower. I was the landlord. I had the power to lock the doors. I had the power to turn off the lights. I had the power to say who stayed and who went. Preston had called me a simple man. He said I didn't understand finance. He said I didn't understand leverage. He was right about one thing. I was a simple man. I believed in simple rules. You work, you get paid. You borrow, you pay back. You break the trust, you face the consequences. He had broken every rule in the book. He thought complexity would save him. He thought layers of corporate shells and fake websites and crypto jargon would protect him from reality. But reality was coming. And reality was an old man in a Ford F-150 with a set of brass keys in his pocket. I drove home that afternoon with the windows down. I turned on the radio. Old-time rock and roll. The kind of music Preston would hate. I started planning the welcome home party. It wouldn't have champagne. It wouldn't have flowers. But it would be memorable. When I got home, I walked into my kitchen and looked at the calendar on the wall. Thursday was circled in red, the day they returned. I took a black marker and drew a big X over the date. "Welcome home, children," I whispered to the empty room. "Rent is due." Thursday came around just as the sun was dipping below the skyline, casting long orange shadows across the city. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my plaid button-down shirt. It was a good shirt, clean and pressed, but it was not expensive. It was the kind of shirt a man wears when he has nothing to prove. I looked at my face in the glass. The lines around my eyes seemed deeper today, but my jaw was set. I was not going to a dinner party. I was going to a crime scene inspection. I drove to the Millennium Tower with the windows down, letting the city noise wash over me. When I pulled up to the valet stand, the young man there recognized my truck from my previous visit. He wrinkled his nose but took the keys. I didn't care. I walked through the lobby with my head high. I nodded to the concierge, but I did not stop. I did not need him to announce me. I did not need permission. I owned the building. The elevator ride up to the 40th floor felt different this time. The last time I was here, I was a thief sneaking in to find the truth. Today, I was the executioner waiting for the right moment to drop the blade. The numbers on the display ticked upward. 38, 39, 40. The doors opened. I walked to door 402 and knocked. It took a moment before the door swung open. Preston stood there. He was tanned a deep golden brown from the Maldives sun. He was wearing a linen shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest and white trousers. He looked like an advertisement for a life of leisure. "Hey, Jerry." He didn't step back to let me in immediately. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking my path. "Glad you could make it. We were just settling in." I stepped past him, forcing him to move. "I am sure you were Preston. How was the trip?" "Epic. Totally epic." He closed the door and followed me into the living room. The place had been cleaned up since my secret visit. The takeout boxes were gone. The clothes were picked up. There were fresh flowers on the table. It was a stage set again. Madison came out of the kitchen. She looked beautiful but tired. Her smile was tight at the corners. "Daddy." She came over and hugged me. She smelled of expensive perfume and anxiety. I hugged her back, but my arms felt stiff. I could feel the tension in her shoulders. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know what. "We have a surprise for you," Preston said, walking over to the bar cart. "We actually invited a few friends over. Some potential investors. I thought it would be good for you to see the kind of circles we are moving in now. Maybe it will help you understand the big picture." I looked at Madison. She looked away. She knew I hated crowds. She knew I hated pretentious dinner parties, but she had let him do it anyway. The doorbell rang before I could answer. Preston lit up. "Showtime," he whispered. 3 men walked in. They were young, loud, and dressed in suits that cost more than my first house. They smelled of cologne and arrogance. They high-fived Preston and kissed Madison on the cheek a little too familiarly. I stood by the window, my hands clasped behind my back. I watched them. They were sharks, but they were small sharks. Bottom feeders. One of them, a tall man with slicked back hair, noticed me. He paused, holding a glass of scotch that Preston had just handed him. "Who is this, Preston?" asked the man, gesturing to me with his glass. "Is this the investor from Chicago you were talking about?" The room went quiet. Madison froze. She looked at Preston, her eyes pleading with him to say the right thing. To say, "This is my father-in-law. This is the man who raised my wife." Preston laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. No, that is just Jerry. He used to help us out with some maintenance work back at the old house. Fixing pipes, patching roofs, that sort of thing. He is practically family, though, so we let him stop by for a free meal now and then. I felt the blood drain from my face. Maintenance work. Fixing pipes. He had reduced my entire existence, my 40 years of fatherhood, my career as a business owner, to a handyman he took pity on. I looked at Madison. Waiting for her to speak up. Waiting for her to say, "No, that is my father." She didn't. She took a sip of her drink and looked down at the floor, studying the pattern on the rug. The tall man laughed. "Oh, I get it. Good help is hard to find, right? Nice to meet you, Jerry." He didn't offer his hand. He just turned his back to me and continued talking about Bitcoin futures. I stood there, rooted to the spot. The disrespect was so absolute, so casual, that it was almost impressive. Preston walked over to me. He held out a bottle of red wine. It was a vintage Cabernet, a bottle that cost $300. I knew because I had seen the charge on the credit card statement I photographed. "Jerry." "Do me a favor," Preston said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Open this up and pour a round for the gentleman, will you? My hands are full." He wasn't asking. He was ordering. He was treating me like a waiter in my own property. I looked at the bottle. Then I looked at Preston. His eyes were challenging me. He wanted to see if I would break. He wanted to see if the old man had any fight left in him. If I fought now, I would cause a scene. They would kick me out. I would lose my leverage. I took the bottle. "Sure, Preston," I said, my voice calm. "Happy to serve." I uncorked the bottle. The sound of the cork popping was satisfying. I walked around the room, pouring wine into their crystal glasses. I moved silently. I listened to their conversation. They were talking about schemes, about pumping and dumping stocks, about hiding assets from the IRS. They were criminals. Stupid, arrogant criminals. I poured wine for the tall man. He didn't even look at me. "Keep it coming, Pops," he said. I poured wine for Madison. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her hand was shaking as she held the glass. I poured wine for Preston. He smirked at me. "Thanks, Jerry. You always were good with your hands." I set the bottle down on the table. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was watching a play, a tragedy, and the final act was coming. I walked back to the window and watched the city lights. I thought about the deed to this building sitting in my safe at home. I thought about the eviction notice that was already drafted and sitting on Sarah's desk. "I own this floor," I thought. "I own the chair. You are sitting in Preston. I own the roof over your head. You are drinking wine in my house and you don't even know it." The dinner was a blur of noise. I sat at the far end of the table eating the catered food that tasted like cardboard. Nobody spoke to me. They talked over me, around me, through me. I was a ghost at the feast. When the meal was over, Preston stood up. "All right, gentlemen, let's move to the cigar lounge downstairs. I have some Cuban cohibas I have been saving." The men cheered. They stood up, straightening their jackets. Preston walked over to me while the others were heading for the door. He leaned in close. His breath smelled of expensive wine and rot. "Look, Jerry," he whispered. "You should head out. These are important people. Big players. I can't have you hanging around looking like you." He gestured to my plaid shirt. "Go home, old man. Thanks for pouring the wine. We will call you if we need the gutters cleaned." He patted my shoulder. A patronizing tap. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the fear behind his eyes. He was desperate to impress these men because he was drowning in debt. He was a small man casting a big shadow, and the sun was setting. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf that has just cornered a rabbit. "I will go, Preston," I said softly. I stood up and brushed off my shirt. "But you should enjoy those cigars," I added. "Smoke them slowly. Savor them. Because you are going to remember this night for the rest of your life." Preston frowned. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means that everything has a price," I said, "and the bill always comes due." I walked past him. I didn't look at Madison. I couldn't. If I looked at her, my resolve might crack. I walked out the front door of the penthouse. I heard the heavy click of the lock behind me. I stood in the hallway for a moment. "Lock the door, Preston," I whispered. "Lock it tight." I reached into my pocket and touched the cold brass of the master key. Because tomorrow morning I am not knocking. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button. The humiliation of the evening did not sting anymore. It had hardened into fuel. I had seen enough. I had given them every chance to be decent. I had given them every chance to be family. They had chosen to treat me like a servant. Tomorrow they would learn that the servant owns the castle. I rode the elevator down to the lobby. The night air was cool on my face as I walked to my truck. I didn't turn on the radio this time. I drove home in silence. The silence of a judge who has already written the verdict. I stood in the hallway with my hand on the elevator button, waiting for the silver doors to slide open and take me away from the toxic air of the penthouse. I could hear the muffled laughter of the men inside the apartment. Men who were likely drinking the wine I had paid for and laughing at the old man who served it. I just wanted to go home and wash the feeling of failure off my skin. But the door behind me opened again. I turned around, expecting to see Madison, perhaps coming to offer a quiet apology or a hug goodbye. Instead, it was Preston. He was holding a sleek black folder in his hand, and he had that salesman smile plastered across his face, the one that didn't reach his eyes. "Hang on a second, Jerry," he said, stepping into the hallway and letting the heavy door click shut behind him. "We didn't get a chance to talk business. I know you were busy with the wine and everything, but I didn't want you to leave without giving you this." He thrust the black folder toward me. I looked at it, but I didn't take it. "What is this, Preston?" "It is the prospectus for our Series B funding round," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Look, I know we have had our differences. I know you think I am flashy. But the numbers don't lie, Jerry. We are looking at a 10 times return on investment within 18 months. The guys inside, they are already in for $1 million each. But I told Madison that we had to keep it in the family. We had to give you a seat at the table." I looked at him standing there in his linen shirt, looking for all the world like a success story, while I knew he was 2 months behind on rent and stealing from his wife. I took the folder. It felt light. Too light. Real business plans have weight. They have market analysis and risk assessments and contingency plans. This felt like a brochure for a timeshare. I opened it. The first page was just a picture of a rocket ship taking off with the words "Sterling Horizons" printed in gold foil. How much, I asked, cutting through his rehearsed speech. "For you," Preston said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, "because you are family. I can get you in at the ground floor tier. $500,000. That buys you preferred stock and a guaranteed quarterly dividend. It is a no-brainer, Jerry. It is the kind of generational wealth you always wanted to build but didn't know how. $500,000. He wasn't just asking for a loan anymore. He was asking for everything. He wanted my house, my truck, my savings, my blood, and my bones. He wanted to strip me clean and leave me with a piece of paper with a rocket ship on it. I looked up from the folder and saw Madison standing in the doorway behind him. She had come out quietly. She was leaning against the frame, hugging her arms around herself. She looked small. "Madison," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the tiled hallway. "Come here." She hesitated, then walked over to stand beside her husband. She didn't look at me. She looked at Preston, waiting for his cue. I held up the folder. "Madison, do you know what this is?" "It is the investment plan, Daddy," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "It is going to change the world. Preston says it uses blockchain to revolutionize lending. I am not asking you what the brochure says, Madison. I am asking if you know where this money goes. Have you seen the accounts? Have you seen the developers? Have you seen the product? Or are you just signing your name where he tells you to sign?" Preston stepped forward, aggressively blocking my view of her. "Hey, watch your tone, Jerry. She is the CFO of the company. Of course she knows. Don't insult her intelligence just because you don't understand technology." I ignored him. I stepped around him and looked directly into my daughter's eyes. "Madison, look at me. This man is asking for $500,000. That is everything I have left. If I give him this money and it disappears, I have nothing. I will be on the street. Do you understand that? Are you willing to gamble my life on his magic beans?" Madison looked at me then, and for a second I saw a flicker of doubt. I saw the daughter who used to sit on my lap and ask me how to check the oil in her car because she wanted to be responsible. But then Preston put his hand on the small of her back. It looked like a gesture of comfort, but I saw his fingers dig into her silk dress. It was a claim, a reminder of who she belonged to now. Madison straightened her spine. The doubt vanished, replaced by a cold, defensive glare that I had never seen before. "Why are you always so negative, Daddy?" she said, her voice rising. "Why can't you just be happy for us? Preston is a visionary. He is trying to build an empire." "He is not building an empire, Madison," I said, pleading with her one last time. "He is digging a hole, and he is going to pull you in with him." "Stop it," she snapped. "You are just jealous." The word hung in the air like a slap. "Jealous," I whispered. "Yes, jealous," she said, and now the tears were welling up in her eyes. But they were angry tears. "You spent your whole life working small jobs, living in a small house, driving a small truck. You were always so afraid of taking risks. You were always so cheap. And now you see Preston living big, dreaming big, and you can't stand it. You want him to fail so you can feel better about your own mediocre life." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. Mediocre. I thought about the 40 years of mornings where I woke up at 4 a.m. to make sure her school fees were paid. I thought about the vacations I didn't take so she could have braces. I thought about the weekends I spent fixing neighbors' roofs so I could buy her that first car. She called it mediocre. She called my sacrifice cheapness. She wasn't just brainwashed. She was gone. The Madison I knew had been erased and rewritten by the man standing next to her, smirking. I closed the black folder slowly. I looked at Preston. He was beaming. He thought he had won. He thought Madison's outburst had shamed me into submission. He thought I would pull out my checkbook to prove I wasn't jealous. "Okay," I said. Preston's eyes widened. "Okay. You mean you are in?" "I mean, I understand," I said. I handed the folder back to him. "I am not investing, Preston, but I am glad we had this talk. It clarified a lot of things for me." Preston's face fell. He snatched the folder back. "You are making a huge mistake, Jerry. You are walking away from a gold mine." I turned to Madison. She was wiping her eyes, looking away from me. "You are right, Madison," I said softly. "I have been small my whole life. I have been a builder. I worried about foundations and safety. I never understood the value of living in the sky. But I am learning. You and your husband have taught me a lot about how the real world works. I pressed the elevator button again. This time the doors opened immediately. Go back to your party, I said. Enjoy your champagne. I stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, I saw Preston put his arm around Madison and whisper something in her ear, probably telling her that I was a lost cause. The doors shut, cutting off their image. I was alone in the metal box descending 40 floors. But I didn't feel small anymore, and I didn't feel sad. The sadness had evaporated the moment she called my life mediocre. Now there was only cold, hard business. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. My signal returned as the elevator passed the 20th floor. I scrolled to the contacts. I didn't call Sarah. I called the number for the property management firm that I had hired yesterday, the moment the deed was recorded. The phone rang twice. This is Peterson Property Management. How can I help you? Mr. Peterson, this is Gerald Sullivan, from GS Holdings. Oh, Mr. Sullivan, good evening, sir. We weren't expecting to hear from you until tomorrow. Change of plans, I said. I just finished an inspection of the property at Unit 402 Millennium Tower. Is there a problem with the unit, sir? No, the unit is fine. The tenant is the problem. I took a deep breath. Mr. Peterson, I want you to send a notice to the tenants in 402 first thing tomorrow morning. By courier. I want a signature required. Yes, sir. What is the nature of the notice? It is a notice of rent increase, I said. Certainly, sir. The market is trending up. What percentage were you thinking? 5%. 7%. Double it, I said. There was silence on the other line. I could hear Mr. Peterson shuffling papers. Excuse me, sir. Did you say double? That is a very aggressive increase. The current lease is month to month, but that might force them to vacate. That is not all. I continued, my voice steady as the elevator hit the ground floor. I also want you to issue a demand for immediate payment of all back rent. I saw the records from the previous owner. They are 2 months behind, under the terms of the lease which I now hold that puts them in default. Yes, sir, that is correct. So here is the offer, Mr. Peterson. They have 24 hours to pay the back rent in full, plus the new security deposit for the increased rate. And if they don't, sir, then start the eviction, I said. And Mr. Peterson, yes, sir. Check the clause in the lease regarding commercial activity in a residential unit. I have reason to believe they are running an unregistered investment business out of the apartment. Use that too. I want them out. I understand, Mr. Sullivan. We will have the papers drafted and delivered by 9 a.m. Thank you. I hung up the phone as the elevator doors opened into the lobby. The concierge smiled at me. Have a good night, sir, he said. I looked at him. I will, I said. I walked out into the cool night air. The city was alive with noise, but all I could hear was the sound of a clock ticking. They wanted to play with the big boys. They wanted to talk about high finance and leverage. Well, they were about to learn the most basic rule of economics. You can't live in a house you can't pay for. And you certainly can't insult the landlord while you are sleeping under his roof. I got into my truck and started the engine. Tomorrow, the rocket ship was going to crash, and I was going to be the one pulling the gravity switch. The sun rose over the city of Seattle, casting a cold gray light through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. I was not there to see it, but I knew exactly what was happening. I was sitting in my kitchen miles away, drinking coffee and staring at my phone, waiting for the inevitable explosion. I had instructed the property management company to deliver the notice at exactly 8 a.m., not a minute sooner, not a minute later. Precision is the hallmark of a professional job. At the penthouse, I imagined the silence was heavy. The hangover from the night before likely lingered in the air, a mix of stale wine and regret. Preston probably woke up feeling invincible, thinking he had successfully put the old man in his place. He probably thought he had bought himself more time. He was wrong. The knock on their door would have been sharp and authoritative. The kind of knock that does not ask for permission but demands attention. It was the courier. By the time Preston stumbled out of bed and opened the door, the courier was gone. All that remained was a large red envelope taped to the mahogany wood at eye level. Red. The color of emergency. The color of stop. I can see him ripping it down, his hands shaking slightly. He probably thought it was just another bill, another annoyance he could toss onto the pile. But this envelope was different. It was thick. It was legal. He tore it open, standing there in the hallway in his silk pajamas. He pulled out the documents. Notice of rent increase. Notice of default. Demand for immediate payment. I know the words by heart because I dictated them myself. Dear tenant, please be advised that effective immediately, the monthly rent for Unit 402 has been adjusted to reflect current market conditions and risk assessment. The new monthly rate is $24,000. Furthermore, our records indicate an outstanding balance of $36,000 in back rent. Pursuant to the terms of your lease, failure to remit the full total of $60,000 within 24 hours will result in immediate eviction proceedings. $60,000. Preston must have stopped breathing. His eyes would have scanned the bottom of the page, looking for a name, looking for someone to scream at. But there was no name. Just a logo. GS Holdings. And a signature that was illegible. He ran back inside, slamming the door. He went straight to his phone. I know this because the property manager, Mr. Peterson, texted me at 8:15, saying the tenant was calling the office in a rage. Preston screamed at the poor receptionist. He demanded to speak to Henderson, the old owner. He shouted that this was illegal, that he had a verbal agreement, that he was a VIP. But Henderson was gone. He was probably on a golf course in Arizona by now, happy to be rid of the headache. And the new management company simply quoted the lease back to him. Clause 4, Section B. The landlord reserves the right to adjust terms upon transfer of ownership. Madison woke up to the sound of him shouting. She walked into the living room, rubbing her eyes. What is going on, Preston? Who are you yelling at? Preston threw the phone onto the sofa. It bounced and landed on the floor. Your dad, he spat. Madison froze. My dad. What did he do? He jinxed us. Preston paced the room, running his hands through his hair. He came here with his bad energy and his cheap clothes, and now everything is falling apart. Look at this. He shoved the papers into her chest. Madison read them. Her face went pale. $60,000. Preston, we don't have $60,000. You said the investors were coming through next week. You said we were liquid. I am liquid. Preston roared, his face turning an ugly shade of red. But my assets are tied up. You know this. It is a liquidity crunch. It happens to billionaires all the time. Musk goes through this. Bezos goes through this. It is part of the game. It is not a game, Preston, she whispered, her voice trembling. It is an eviction notice. They want us out in 24 hours. Where are we going to go? We are not going anywhere. Preston grabbed a vase from the table, a delicate crystal thing that Madison loved, and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall, raining glass onto the expensive carpet. Madison screamed and covered her mouth. She backed away from him. She had never seen him like this. She had seen him stressed. She had seen him arrogant, but she had never seen him violent. Fix this, Preston yelled, pointing a finger at her. This is your fault. If you hadn't bought that stupid dress for the wedding, if you hadn't insisted on the underwater villa, we would have cash on hand. You bleed me dry, Madison. You and your whole family. My fault. Madison's eyes filled with tears. You told me we were rich. You told me I could spend whatever I wanted. I told you to look the part, Preston sneered. I didn't tell you to bankrupt me. Now call your father. What? Call him, Preston commanded. He has money. He sold that land. He has at least 100 grand sitting in the bank. Tell him it is an emergency. Tell him I am sick. Tell him I need surgery. Whatever. Just get the money. He is not going to give us money, Preston. You humiliated him last night. You treated him like a servant. I treated him like what he is. Preston stepped closer to her, invading her space. And right now, he is our only option. Call him, now. Or you can pack your bags and go live on the street, because I am not taking you with me if this ship goes down. Madison looked at the man she had married. The genius, the visionary, the love of her life. And for the first time she saw the rat behind the mask. He was scared, and a scared rat bites anything close to it. She picked up her phone. Her hands were shaking so bad she dropped it once. She picked it up and dialed my number. I sat in my kitchen and watched my phone light up. Princess calling. I let it ring. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and strong. 4 rings, 5 rings. I reached out and pressed the volume button, silencing the ringtone. I did not decline the call. I just let it ring into the void. On the other end, Madison listened to the silence. "Daddy, please pick up," she whispered. "Please, Daddy. I am scared." But there was no answer. Only the automated voicemail greeting. "Hi, this is Jerry. Leave a message." She hung up, sobbing. He is not answering. Preston kicked the coffee table, sending magazines flying. Useless. He is useless. You are useless. He paced back and forth like a caged animal. "Fine," he said. "If he won't answer, we will force him. We will go to his house. We will make him sign a check." "We can't do that," Preston Madison cried. "That is harassment. It is survival," Preston shouted. He grabbed his car keys. "Get dressed. We are going to his house. We are going to get that money one way or another." He stormed out of the room, leaving Madison standing amidst the shattered glass of her favorite vase. She looked at the red notice on the floor. $60,000. She realized then that the walls of her castle were made of paper, and someone had just lit a match. She didn't know yet that the person holding the match was the same man she was trying to call. She wiped her tears and followed her husband, not because she loved him anymore, but because she was terrified of what he might do if she stayed behind. I watched the phone screen go dark. "Come on over, children," I said to the empty kitchen. I stood up and walked to the front door. I unlocked it. I wanted them to come in. I wanted them to see me sitting in my chair, calm and ready. I checked my watch. 9 a.m. The clock was ticking. 23 hours left. Preston thought he was driving to his salvation. He didn't know he was driving straight into the final trap. I went to the safe in my office and pulled out the deed to the penthouse. I placed it on the coffee table right next to my own eviction notice that Preston had sent me via text just days ago. Poetic justice is best served cold and with a paper trail. I sat down and waited. The landlord was in. The clock on my kitchen wall ticked loudly. It was the only sound in the house. I had been sitting there for an hour, watching the security feed on my iPad. I saw when Preston's flashy leased BMW pulled into my driveway. I saw him slam the car door shut, his face twisted in a mask of rage and panic. I saw Madison step out slowly, looking at the house she grew up in like it was a foreign country. She looked terrified. They came to the front door. Preston pounded on the wood with his fist. "Open up, Jerry. We know you are in there. Open the door right now." I did not move. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but I drank it anyway. He pounded again, louder this time. I could hear the desperation in his voice. He was a man who was used to bullying his way through life, used to shouting until people gave him what he wanted, just to make him stop. But wood does not care how loud you scream. And neither did I. After 10 minutes of banging and shouting, silence fell over the porch. I looked at the monitor. Preston was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair. Madison was sitting on the porch swing, the same swing where her mother used to rock her to sleep. She had her head in her hands. Then my phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up. A text message from Preston. Even now, standing on my porch about to lose everything, he could not bring himself to ask nicely. He could not humble himself. The message read simply, "Send me the rent money. It is an emergency. Transfer $36,000 now and we can talk about the investment later." I stared at the screen. He was still trying to negotiate. He still thought he had leverage. He thought that if he framed it as a loan or a favor, I would crack. He thought I was just a stubborn old man holding a grudge, not a businessman holding a winning hand. I typed my reply, slowly savoring every letter. "Didn't I tell you?" I hit send. On the security monitor, I saw Preston look at his phone. He stopped pacing. He frowned. He typed something back furiously. "Tell me what, you crazy old man. Stop playing games. Open the door." I did not reply to that one. Instead, I initiated a video call. I saw him stare at his screen. He hesitated. He probably thought I was calling to surrender. He probably thought I wanted to see his face so he could intimidate me one last time. He swiped the screen to answer. My phone screen filled with his face. He was sweating. His eyes were wild. Behind him, I could see the white siding of my house. "Listen to me, Jerry," he shouted before I could say a word. "You are making a huge mistake. If you don't open this door and write that check, I am going to sue you for emotional distress. I am going to make sure you never see Madison again." I stayed silent. I simply flipped the camera view on my phone. I wasn't pointing it at my face. I was pointing it at the coffee table. On the table sat 2 documents side by side. The first was the eviction notice he had received that morning. The red envelope. The second was the deed of trust for the Millennium Tower Unit 402. I moved the camera closer so he could read the fine print. I wanted him to see the stamp of the county recorder. I wanted him to see the date. But most of all, I wanted him to see the name of the grantee, GS Holdings, LLC. And right below it, the signature of the managing member, Gerald Sullivan. I heard Preston's breath hitch on the other end of the line. "What is this?" he whispered. I flipped the camera back to my face. I looked him dead in the eye through the screen. "Hello, Tenant 402, I said, my voice calm and steady. Preston didn't say anything. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You seem confused, Preston, so let me explain it to you. GS Holdings stands for Gerald Sullivan. I am one who bought your debt. I am the one who bought your building. And I am the one evicting you." "No," Preston stammered. "No, that is impossible. You are a contractor. You fix roofs. You don't have this kind of money." "I have exactly this kind of money," I said. "Because unlike you, I spent 40 years building things instead of betting on them." I watched the color drain from his face. It started at his neck and moved up until he looked like a sheet of paper. The arrogance, the swagger, the fake confidence, it all evaporated in a single second, leaving behind a scared little boy who had been caught stealing from the cookie jar. But I wasn't done. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain so they could see me standing there, phone in hand. "You asked me for rent money, Preston," I said. "But you forgot the most basic rule of real estate. You don't pay rent to yourself. And since I am the landlord, I don't think I will be writing you a check today." Madison, who had been listening from the swing, stood up. She walked over to Preston and looked at his phone screen. She saw the deed. She saw my face. And then she looked at her husband. "You lied to me," she whispered. Her voice was faint, but the microphone picked it up. "You said it was a corporate takeover. You said it was a liquidity crisis." "It is a hostile takeover," Preston shouted, flailing his arms at the phone. "Your father is trying to ruin me, Madison." He went behind my back. "This is illegal. This is insider trading or something." "It is called business, Preston," I said. "And Madison, he didn't just lie to you about the rent. Ask him about the loan. Ask him about the $200,000 he borrowed against this house. My house. Using a signature that he forged." Madison gasped. She grabbed Preston's arm. "You did what?" "You mortgaged Daddy's house." I needed capital." Preston stuttered, trying to pull away from her. "It was a bridge loan, Madison. I was going to pay it back next week." "Liar," she screamed. She shoved him. It was the first time I had ever seen her fight back. "You stole his house. You stole my dowry. You stole everything." I watched through the window as my daughter crumbled. She didn't faint like in the movies. She just gave up. Her legs stopped working. She sank down onto the wooden planks of the porch, her expensive dress pooling around her. She put her head between her knees and began to sob. It was a guttural sound, a sound of pure heartbreak and realization. Preston looked at her, then looked back at me. His eyes were pleading now. "Jerry, look, let's talk about this. We can work something out. I can pay you back. I have investors lined up. Just give me 30 days. Please." "You have 23 hours left, Preston," I said, cold as ice. "But where will we go? We have nowhere to go." I looked at the man who had called me a servant. I looked at the man who had threatened to keep my grandchildren away from me. "That sounds like a tenant problem," I said, "not a landlord problem." I ended the call. I stood there by the window watching them. Preston was banging on the door again, but it was weak now. He was crying. He was yelling apologies, yelling promises, yelling threats. But he was shouting at a fortress that he could not breach. Madison was still on the floor, rocking back and forth. My heart ached for her. Every instinct in my body wanted to run out there, pick her up, and tell her it was going to be okay. But I stayed put. If I opened that door now, I would be saving her from the consequences of her choices. And if I saved her now, she would never learn. She would go back to him. She would believe his next lie. She had to break completely before she could be rebuilt. I closed the curtain. I walked back to the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the sink. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the silence of waiting. It was the silence of a judgment that had been delivered. The war was over. I had won. But as I listened to my daughter weeping on the other side of the door, I realized that victory tasted a lot like tears. The 24 hours expired at exactly 9 in the morning on a Sunday. It was a quiet morning in the neighborhood, the kind where people were mowing their lawns or walking their dogs. But the peace was broken by the sound of a convoy turning onto my street. First came my truck. Behind me was Sarah's sedan, and behind her was a county sheriff's patrol car with its lights flashing silently against the daylight. I did not park in the driveway this time. I parked on the street. I wanted the neighbors to see. I wanted the world to see. Shame is a powerful disinfectant, and it was time to clean the house. I walked up the path to the front porch. The sheriff, a tall man named Miller, who I had known for years, walked beside me. Sarah followed, carrying a briefcase thick with the evidence we had compiled over the last few days. The mortgage fraud, the Ponzi scheme documents, the forgery. I didn't knock. I used my key. The door swung open, revealing a scene of absolute misery. Preston was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, his head in his hands. He was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, rumpled and stained with sweat. Madison was curled up on the sofa, staring blankly at the wall. Her eyes were red and swollen. When we walked in, Preston scrambled to his feet. He looked at me, then he looked at the sheriff, and his face went gray. "What is this?" he stammered, backing away until he hit the fireplace mantel. "You can't bring the police here, Jerry. This is a civil matter. It is a family dispute. It stopped being a family dispute when you forged my signature." "Preston," I said, my voice filling the room. "It stopped being a civil matter when you stole $200,000 from a federally insured bank using my identity." Sheriff Miller stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Preston Sterling," he said, his voice calm and professional. "I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of bank fraud, identity theft, and grand larceny." "No!" Preston screamed. He looked wild. He looked around the room for an escape route, but there was none. "No, you don't understand. I was going to pay it back. It was a loan. Madison, tell them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." Madison sat up slowly. She looked at her husband. She looked at the handcuffs hanging from the sheriff's belt. She didn't say a word. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Miller commanded. Preston lunged, not at the sheriff, but at me. For a second, I thought he was going to hit me, but he stopped inches from my face, grabbing my shirt. "Jerry, please," he begged, spit flying from his mouth. "Please don't do this. I will sign over the company. I will give you everything. I just need time. I can't go to jail. I am not built for jail." I looked down at his hands clutching my plaid shirt, the hands that had never done a day of honest work in their life. "You are right, Preston," I said, peeling his fingers off me one by one. "You are not built for jail. You are built for illusion, and illusions don't survive in a cage." The sheriff grabbed Preston's arm and spun him around. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and metallic. It was the sound of a steel trap finally snapping onto the rat's leg. Preston started to cry. It wasn't a dignified cry. It was a high-pitched wail of a child who realizes the game is over. He was reciting legal jargon he had probably heard on TV, shouting about habeas corpus and due process as Miller marched him toward the door. Madison finally moved. She jumped off the sofa and ran to me. She threw her arms around my legs, burying her face in my stomach, just like she used to do when she was 5 years old and afraid of thunder. "Daddy, stop them," she sobbed. "Please make them stop. He is my husband. You can't let them take him." I looked down at the top of her head. I felt the familiar weight of her clinging to me. For 20 years, that weight had been my anchor. It had been the reason I worked, the reason I breathed. But now it felt heavy. It felt like a chain dragging me down. I reached down and gently but firmly unhooked her arms from my waist. I took a step back, putting distance between us. "I am not doing this, Madison," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "You did this. You chose him." But I didn't know, she cried, looking up at me with mascara running down her cheeks. "I didn't know he was a criminal. I thought he loved me." "You knew he disrespected me," I said. "You knew he treated me like a servant at your wedding. You knew he banned me from your life until he needed my money. And you stood by him. You watched him humiliate me and you said nothing." "I was scared," she whispered. I shook my head. "No, Madison. You were greedy. You liked the penthouse. You liked the idea of being a rich man's wife more than you liked being a good man's daughter. And now the bill has come due." She looked at me with horror in her eyes. "Daddy, what are you saying?" "I am saying that you are an accomplice," I said, pointing to Sarah. "My lawyer has the documents, Madison. You signed the loan applications. You are the CFO. Technically, you should be in those handcuffs right next to him." Madison gasped, covering her mouth. "But I made a deal," I continued. "I told the district attorney that if you cooperated, if you testified against him, they would drop the charges against you. That is the only gift I can give you now. Your freedom, but not your lifestyle." I gestured to the open door where Preston was being shoved into the back of the police car, his wails cut off as the door slammed shut. "He is gone, Madison. And you need to go too." "Go where?" she asked, looking around the living room. This is your house. Can't I stay here? Just for a while, just until I get back on my feet." I looked at the walls of my home, the home I had almost lost because of her blind loyalty to a con artist. If I let her stay, she would never learn. She would curl up in her old room and wait for me to fix everything just like I always did. She would wait for the next Preston to come along and sweep her away. "No," I said. The word hung in the air. "No," she repeated. "But I have nowhere to go." "You have 2 suitcases," I said, pointing to the luggage they had brought with them yesterday. "Pack them. Take whatever clothes you can fit. You have 10 minutes. "Daddy, please." "I am not your daddy right now," I said, turning my back on her. "I am the landlord, and you are trespassing." I walked out onto the porch and stood there while she packed. I heard her sobbing inside. I heard the zipper of the suitcases. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to go inside and hold her, but I knew that if I did, I would be killing her future. She needed to hit the bottom. She needed to feel the cold, hard ground so she could learn how to stand up on her own. 10 minutes later, she walked out. She was dragging 2 large suitcases. She looked small and broken. She stopped at the bottom of the steps and looked back at me. "I hate you," she whispered. "I know," I said. "That is okay. You can hate me, as long as you survive." She turned and began walking down the driveway. She didn't have a car. Preston's BMW was being towed as evidence. She walked toward the bus stop, dragging her life behind her. I watched her go until she turned the corner. Then, and only then, did I let myself sit down on the porch swing. I put my head in my hands and I wept. I wept for the little girl who used to chase fireflies in the yard. I wept for the wedding that was a lie. I wept for the empty house behind me. But as the tears dried, I felt something else. I felt the air in my lungs. I felt the solid wood of the porch beneath my feet. I was alone, but I was safe. I still had my house. I still had my dignity. I stood up and walked back inside. The house was quiet. I locked the door. It was time to clean up. 6 months have passed since the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from my driveway. The silence that followed was heavy at first, like the air before a thunderstorm, but slowly, day by day, it transformed into something else. It became the silence of peace, the silence of a life that has been reclaimed. I am sitting on the edge of my old aluminum boat floating in the middle of Green Lake just as the sun begins to rise. The water is glass calm, reflecting the oranges and purples of the morning sky. I have a fishing rod in my hand. It is not an expensive rod. It is the same one I have used for 20 years. But it feels good in my grip. It feels real. My phone is turned off in my pocket. I don't need to check the stock market. I don't need to check my bank balance. The sale of the Millennium Tower penthouse closed last week. I sold the entire unit to a tech executive from California. The market had rebounded just as I predicted, and I walked away with double what I paid. Preston had called me a simple man who didn't understand finance. He called me a dinosaur. But the dinosaur just made a $2 million profit on a deal that the genius lost everything on. Preston is currently residing in a federal facility in Oregon. He took a plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence. He is serving 5 years for bank fraud and identity theft. I heard from Sarah that he spends his time in the prison library trying to convince other inmates to invest in a cigarette trading scheme. Some people never change. They are born with a hole in their soul that no amount of money can fill. I don't hate him anymore. Hate takes energy. I just feel nothing. He is a bad memory, a ghost that has been exorcised from my life. But Madison, Madison is a different story. I put down my rod and pick up the thermos of coffee. I take a sip, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I drove past the supermart yesterday. It is a large grocery chain on the edge of town. I parked my truck at the far end of the lot, where the shadows are deep. I pulled my baseball cap down low over my eyes and walked inside. I didn't go there to shop, I went there to watch. She was at register 4. She was wearing a red vest with a name tag that just said Madison. No last name, no titles, no CFO of a fake company. Just Madison. She looked tired. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, not the elaborate styles she used to wear. She wasn't wearing makeup. There were dark circles under her eyes. She was scanning items for a young mother with 3 screaming kids. The baby was crying, the toddler was pulling at candy bars, and the mother looked exhausted. In the old days, Madison would have rolled her eyes. She would have looked at that woman with disdain, judging her for her messy life. But yesterday, I saw something different. Madison smiled at the woman. It wasn't a fake smile. It was a tired, sympathetic smile. She scanned the milk and the diapers quickly. She bagged the groceries with care, making sure the bread didn't get squashed. When the woman realized she was a few dollars short and started to panic, Madison didn't call the manager. She reached into her own pocket, into the pocket of that red vest, and pulled out a $5 bill. Her tips, her lunch money. "It is okay," she told the woman. "I have been there. Have a good day." I stood in aisle 9 behind a stack of cereal boxes, and I felt a lump form in my throat so big I could barely breathe. My daughter, who used to demand $50,000 for a vacation, was giving away her own money to a stranger. She is living in a small studio apartment near the bus line. I know this because I had Sarah check on her. She pays her own rent. She takes the bus to work. She cooks her own meals. She is not the princess anymore. She is a citizen. She is a worker. Every instinct in my body screams at me to go to that register, to write her a check, to buy her a car, to bring her home and wrap her in a blanket and tell her that Daddy is here to fix it all. I have the money now. I could make her life easy again with the stroke of a pen. But I stay in the shadows. I walk out of the store without her seeing me. Because if I save her now, I rob her of the victory. She is building her own foundation. For the first time in her life, she is pouring her own concrete. She is learning that money represents hours of your life, not just numbers on a screen. She is learning that dignity comes from being useful, not from being rich. I reel in my line. The hook is empty. The fish stole the bait. I smile. That is fair. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. People tell me I was too hard on her. Even Sarah sometimes looks at me with a question in her eyes. They say family is about forgiveness. They say you should support your children no matter what. But I believe that true love is not about shielding someone from the fire. It is about letting them walk through it so they can be forged into steel. I didn't kick her out to punish her. I kicked her out to save her from becoming Preston. I cut off the branch to save the tree. I look at the horizon. The sun is fully up now, painting the water in gold. I miss her. God knows I miss her. My house is too quiet, and my heart still aches when I pass her old room. But I am waiting. I am waiting for the day she knocks on my door, not because she needs money, but because she wants to see me. I am waiting for the day she drives into my driveway in a car she bought with her own wages. I am waiting for the day she can look me in the eye as an equal, as a survivor, as a woman of substance. Until that day comes, I will be here. I will be fishing. I will be living my life with the dignity I fought so hard to protect. I am Gerald Sullivan. I am a builder. I am a father. And I finally learned that the most important thing you can build for your children is not a trust fund, but a backbone. The water laps against the boat. It is a gentle rhythm, a rhythm of healing. I cast my line out again. The lure hits the water with a soft splash. I have time. I can wait. Because for the first time in a long time, I know that the future is being built on solid ground. And that is worth more than all the penthouses in the world. Here is the lesson I want you to take away from my story. We often confuse enabling with loving. We think that saying yes is the kindest thing we can do, but sometimes the most loving word in the dictionary is no. When you allow someone to mistreat you, when you allow them to use you in the name of family, you are not helping them. You are teaching them that bad behavior has no consequences. You are robbing them of the chance to grow. Standing up for your dignity is not selfishness. It is the only foundation upon which a real relationship can be built. Respect yourself enough to walk away and love them enough to let them fall so they can learn how to stand. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had to practice tough love with someone you cared about? How hard was it, and was it worth it in the end? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one of them. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are the architect of your own life. Don't let anyone else hold the blueprints. See you in the next story.